Buying a home is supposed to be a fresh start, a place where you can finally relax, enjoy your space, and live on your own terms. That's exactly what I thought when I bought my new house. It was perfect.
Welcome to Karen Chronicles. Before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue creating even better content. Thank you so much. All right, let's get started.
A beautiful modern home with a private and pool, tucked away just outside the boundaries of an HOA-controlled neighborhood called Oak Haven Estates. That was the key factor. It was outside the HOA, which meant no ridiculous rules, no power-hungry HOA board, no nosy enforcers telling me what to do with my own property. At least that's what I thought. But what I didn't realize? The Oak Haven HOA didn't believe in boundaries. And even though I was outside their jurisdiction, they still thought they could control me. The first warning sign. I had only been living in my new home for a week when I noticed something strange. A letter in my mailbox. At first, I thought it was junk mail, just one of those typical neighborhood flyers. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. Notice of violation, Oak Haven I blinked. A violation notice from the HOA for a house that wasn't even part of their community? I read further. Your property has been flagged for the following: infractions: unauthorized pool fencing, non-compliant exterior paint color, lawn maintenance below HOA standards. To remain in good standing with the Oak Haven community, please correct these violations within 14 days to avoid fines. I laughed out loud. Surely this was a mistake. I wasn't part of the HOA. I didn't sign their agreements. They had no authority over my house, or so I thought. The first encounter with the HOA tyrants the next day, I was out skimming my pool. When I saw her, a woman in her 60s wearing an HOA badge, marching straight toward my backyard. No knock. No introduction, just a sense of entitlement so strong, she actually thought she had the right to be on my property. "Excuse me," she called out, arms crossed. "Are you the homeowner?" I set down the skimmer. "Yeah, who's asking?" She gave a tight-lipped smile. "I'm Margaret Reynolds, president of the Oak Haven Estates HOA. We sent you a notice about your violations. Have you had a chance to review it?" I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, I saw it. But there's a problem. You guys don't have jurisdiction over this property." "I'm not part of your HOA," Margaret's smile faltered. "That may be technically true," she said carefully, "but we have community standards that we enforce to maintain the integrity of the neighborhood. Your home, while not within our borders, is still visible to Oak Haven residents, and we expect all nearby homeowners to comply with our regulations." I blinked. "You expect me to follow rules I never agreed to because my house is visible from your neighborhood?" She nodded, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. "Correct. It's about preserving property values and ensuring harmony in the community. Surely you understand." I stared at her. "No, I really don't." She sighed. "Look, I know you're new here, so I'll give you a friendly warning. Oak Haven has a strong history of making sure nearby homes align with our values. If you refuse to cooperate, we will have to take further action." I crossed my arms. "Further action? Like what?" She gave me a smug smile. "Oh, you'll find out soon enough." And with that, she turned on her heel and walked away. I stood there, watching her go, my blood boiling. This wasn't just a power trip. This was a threat. And something told me this was just the beginning. Margaret's thinly veiled threat was still fresh in my mind. She had made it very clear that Oak Haven Estates didn't care about property lines. They believed they could control anything within sight of their precious neighborhood. But even after that ridiculous conversation, I still didn't think they'd have the audacity to escalate so soon. That was my mistake, because the very next morning, I caught a man trespassing in my backyard. An uninvited guest. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee when I glanced out the window and saw a stranger standing next to my pool, a middle-aged, Man balding, wearing a cheap blue polo with an HOA compliance badge clipped to his collar. He was inspecting my property, clipboard in hand, as if he owned the place. I stormed outside. "Hey! What the hell are you doing in my yard?" He barely flinched, just turned to me, unimpressed, and sighed. "Ah, you must be the homeowner," he said, as if I were the intruder. "I'm Bob, head of HOA enforcement for Oak Haven Estates. We need to talk about your pool." I blinked. "Talk about what? And how did you even get in here?" Bob waved his clipboard dismissively. "Your fence was unlocked." I stared at him. No, it wasn't. Bob's lips twitched. "Well, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we have a problem." He gestured toward my pool. "This amenity falls within Oak Haven's designated community zone, which means you are technically required to pay HOA membership fees before using it." I let out a sharp laugh. "You're telling me that my private pool on my own property belongs to your HOA? Bob didn't even blink. "In a way, yes. It affects our neighborhood's shared aesthetic, and HOA bylaws clearly state that all recreational facilities within Oak Haven's vicinity are subject to regulation." I shook my head in disbelief. "That's not how property works. I own this land outright." Bob smiled condescendingly. "Actually, our legal team has reviewed this situation before, and we've determined that Oak Haven's influence extends beyond its official borders for aesthetic and functional purposes." I narrowed my eyes. "Oh yeah? Show me that legal ruling." Bob ignored me. Instead, he reached into his folder and pulled out a violation notice. The HOA's fake fine. "This is your official notice," he said, handing me the paper. "Failure to comply with HOA regulations will result in daily fines until your membership is in good standing." I scanned the paper. HOA membership fees. Due, $500 fine for unauthorized pool usage, $1,000 failure to comply, may result in legal action. I let out a slow exhale. "You're seriously trying to charge me a fee for using my own pool?" Bob smiled like he had won. "That's correct. We're very strict about community compliance." I stepped closer. "Let me make this very clear, Bob," I said. "I am not in your HOA. My house is not in your community, and you do not have the authority to fine me for using my own property." Bob gave me a patronizing nod. "I understand that you're new here, so I'll give you time to think this over, but I'd strongly suggest paying the fine before additional penalties accrue." I clenched my jaw. "Get off my property, now." Bob sighed, glanced at his clipboard, and finally turned toward the gate. But before leaving, he glanced back at me. "This can all be much easier if you just cooperate," he said. "Oak Haven has a history of resolving situations like this, one way or another." And then he walked away. The turning point, I stood there, staring at the fake violation notice in my hands, my blood boiling. This wasn't just some annoying HOA nonsense anymore. This was trespassing, extortion, harassment. And now it was personal. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of the violation notice. Then I went inside and grabbed my property deed, because if Oak Haven wanted a fight, they were about to get one. The fake violation notice, the trespassing, the insane claim that my private pool belonged to the HOA. I thought that was as ridiculous as it could get. I was wrong, because Bob wasn't done, and neither was Karen. The daily stalking begins. The very next morning, I caught Bob outside my house. Not on my property this time, but close, standing just beyond my fence line, taking photos of my yard. I stepped outside, hands on my hips. "Seriously, Bob?" He barely reacted, just scribbled something on his clipboard and muttered, "Routine compliance check." I scoffed. "Compliance with what? I don't even belong to your damn HOA." Bob sighed like I was a child who just didn't get it. "That's not for you to decide." And then he walked away. I stared after him, heart pounding. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was full-blown stalking. Bob blocks my own mother from visiting. 2 days later, I was expecting a visit from my mom. She had never seen the new house, and I was excited to show her the backyard and pool. But as I waited on the porch, my phone rang. "Mom, hey, I think I just got stopped by some guy. He says I'm not allowed to park near your house." My stomach dropped. I stepped outside, and sure enough, there was Bob, standing next to my mother's car, arms crossed, clipboard in hand. I stormed over. "Bob, move!" Bob turned completely unfazed. "Visitors must be approved through the HOA, I laughed. "I'm not in your HOA. Bob shrugged. "Still, we try to regulate who comes and goes to maintain neighborhood security." My mother, still sitting in her car, frowned. "Is this a joke?" I clenched my fists. "Bob, this is harassment. Move now!" He sighed, stepping back just enough to let her drive through. But as she passed, he jotted something down. "Expect a notice," he muttered. I wanted to scream. "Enter Karen, the queen of HOA corruption." That night I got another letter. "Mandatory show meeting. Attendance required." At this point I was done playing nice, so I showed up. The meeting was held in the Oak Haven clubhouse, where HOA board members sat at a long table looking smug as ever. At the center, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of HOA tyranny. She gave me a fake smile as I sat down. "Ah, Mr. My name, we've been expecting you." I crossed my arms. "Oh, I'm sure you have." Karen folded her hands. "You've been quite difficult. Bob tells us you've been disruptive, argumentative, and refusing to comply with standard HOA policies." I chuckled. "That's because I don't belong to your HOA." Karen's smile didn't falter. "That's debatable." I blinked. "What?" She slid a stack of papers toward me. "This is a revised version of our neighborhood zoning guidelines. See, Oak Haven has recently adopted a new interpretation of our jurisdictional reach. While your home may not have been part of the original community, we've determined that it now falls under our oversight." I stared at her. "You just decided my house belongs to you?" Karen tilted her head. "Well, it's not really up to you." I took a deep breath. "Let me make this simple for you, Karen." I pulled out my property deed, flipping to the clear legal boundary lines. "This," I said, tapping the document, "proves I am not in your HOA. I never signed your agreements. I am not required to follow your rules, and I sure as hell don't owe you money." Karen stared at the paper. Then she laughed. "Mr. My name," she said, shaking her head. "Anyone can make a fake document. This doesn't prove anything." My jaw tightened. "That's my official property deed, filed with the county." Karen smiled. "I'll have to verify that with our legal team. In the meantime, you are still expected to comply. Either pay your HOA fees or prepare for legal action." I sat back, stunned. They weren't just overreaching, they were delusional. And now, they were threatening to sue me over a house they had zero ownership of. I glanced at Bob, who was watching smugly from the side. Then I looked back at Karen, whose eyes gleamed with confidence. They thought they had won. They thought I would give up and comply. But what they didn't realize, I was just getting started. Karen and Bob thought they could bully me into submission. They thought they could intimidate me with fake fines, legal threats, and constant harassment. But what they didn't realize, they had just messed with the wrong homeowner, because I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to bury them in court. Step 1. Calling in the big guns. The day after Karen dismissed my legal property deed as fake, I made a call to the best real estate lawyer in town. His name was Mark Simmons, and he had a long history of tearing corrupt HOAs apart. When I explained my situation, he actually laughed. "Oh, this is going to be fun," he said. "These HOA types always think they're untouchable. Let's show them they're not." Within 24 hours, Mark had drafted an official cease and desist letter warning Oak Haven Estates to immediately stop all harassment and false claims against my property. I personally hand-delivered it to the HOA office. Karen took it, smirked, and said, "We'll let our legal team review this." I stared at her. "Karen, this is your final warning. If you don't stop, we're taking you to court." She laughed. "Good luck with that," she sneered. "Shows always win. Step 2. The final straw, you'd think after getting a legal warning, Karen and Bob would have backed off. But nope. The very next day, Bob was back outside my house, taking photos of my property like nothing had happened. A new HOA violation letter appeared in my mailbox, this time threatening a property lien if I didn't pay the $5,000 in accumulated fines. That was it, they had pushed too far. I called Mark. "Let's do it." "Good," he said. "We're suing them for harassment, trespassing, and fraudulent financial claims." And 2 weeks later, we went to court. The HOA faces the judge. The courtroom was packed. Karen sat at the HOA's table, looking smug as ever, flanked by 2 nervous-looking lawyers. Bob was there too, clutching his clipboard like it was a shield. I sat next to Mark, calm and collected, because I knew we were about to destroy them. The judge, a no-nonsense man in his 60s, leaned forward. "All right, let's get to it, Mr. My name. You're alleging that Oak Haven Estates has been unlawfully harassing you." Mark stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. My client's property is not within HOA jurisdiction, yet the HOA has falsely claimed authority, issued fake fines, trespassed, and attempted to extort money from him." The judge frowned. "Is this true, Ms. Reynolds?" Karen put on her fakest smile. "Your Honor, Oak Haven has a long-standing commitment to maintaining the integrity of our community. The plaintiff's home, while not technically within our original HOA limits, affects our neighborhood aesthetics, and we have the right to enforce reasonable standards." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have a signed HOA agreement from the plaintiff?" Karen's smile faltered. "Well, not exactly," she admitted. Mark stepped in. "Your Honor, my client has his official property deed, which clearly shows he is not part of Oak Haven Estates. Yet the HOA has repeatedly issued fake violation notices, harassed his visitors, and even attempted to claim ownership of his private pool." The judge's eyes narrowed. "They did what?" Mark smirked. "We have photographic evidence, recorded conversations, and security footage of HOA enforcement officer Bob trespassing and claiming my client's backyard as HOA property." Bob sank lower into his seat. Karen's face turned bright red. The judge sighed. "Ms. Reynolds, do you have any legal basis for your actions?" Karen tried to recover. "Your Honor, we were only trying to ensure community harmony. The plaintiff refused to work with us, so we had to—" The judge held up a hand. "Stop." Karen's mouth snapped shut. The judge took a deep breath, then he turned to me. "Mr. My name, I assume you are seeking damages." Mark nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. My client is seeking financial compensation for legal fees, emotional distress, and punitive damages due to the HOA's fraudulent claims." The judge leaned back. Then he slammed the gavel down. The verdict. The HOA was ordered to pay $50,000 in damages. All fines and violations against me were declared void. Karen and Bob were officially warned that any further harassment would result in criminal charges. Karen looked shell-shocked. Bob looked like he was about to cry. I just smiled, because for the first time since moving in, I had finally won. And Karen, she had just lost everything. Karen thought she was unstoppable. Bob thought he was above the law. The Oak Haven HOA thought they could bully me forever. But after their brutal court loss, everything changed, and now it was time to watch them burn. Karen and Bob. The aftermath too. Weeks after the judge's ruling, the fallout hit Oak Haven like an earthquake. Bob fired. The HOA board immediately terminated him as their compliance officer after he was caught trespassing, harassing homeowners and falsifying violations. Karen forced to resign. After years of power tripping, fabricating fines, and abusing authority, the HOA board had finally had enough. She was officially removed as HOA president and stripped of any decision-making power. The HOA publicly humiliated. They were forced to issue a formal apology, not just to me, but to the entire community. They had to wipe out all fraudulent fines issued under Karen's rule, pay my $50,000 in damages within 30 days, admit they had no legal control over my property. It was a complete and total defeat, and I wasn't about to let it go unnoticed. The ultimate celebration, a pool party for the ages. Once, my victory was official. I had an idea. A petty but perfect idea. I sent out invitations to all my friendly neighbors, the ones who had stood by me, who had secretly hated Karen and Bob, and who were just as fed up with the HOA as I was. I called it the HOA Free Pool Party. BBQ? Check. Drinks. Ice cold. Music. Loud enough to make a statement. HOA board members not invited, and you better believe, Karen noticed. Karen's final defeat as guests arrived, laughing, swimming, and enjoying the very pool Karen once tried to claim. I spotted her, standing at the edge of the street, arms crossed, fuming. Bob stood beside her, looking miserable. They were watching, but they weren't welcome. At one point, Karen actually tried to march toward my driveway, but before she could even open her mouth, I held up a hand. "Karen," I said, smiling, "this is a private event. And since this isn't HOA property, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Her face twitched. "You think you've won?" she hissed. I laughed. "Oh, I know I have." She opened her mouth to argue, but then Bob grabbed her arm. "Karen, it's over." She froze. Then with one last hateful glare, she turned and stormed off. And me, I raised my drink in the air. "To freedom from the HOA," I called out. The crowd cheered, because for the first time in years, Oak Haven belonged to the people again. And Karen, she was just a bad memory. The end or just the beginning. Karen may be gone, but if there's one thing I've learned, HOA drama never truly dies, because somewhere, in some other neighborhood, another power-hungry Karen is waiting. And when she shows up, you better believe I'll be ready. Life lessons from the HOA tyrant's downfall. Stand your ground and know your rights. This story is more than just HOA drama. It's a powerful lesson in knowing your rights, standing up against abuse, and fighting back against corruption. 2. Often, people in positions of small power, whether in a homeowners association, a workplace, or even a community, believe they can control others through intimidation and manipulation. They rely on the idea that most people won't question them, won't push back, and won't fight. But as we saw, knowledge is power. The homeowner didn't just react emotionally. He documented everything, hired a lawyer, and used the legal system to shut them down. This is a crucial lesson for anyone facing unfair treatment. Don't just argue, gather evidence, understand the rules, and fight back strategically. Another key takeaway is that bullies thrive in silence. Karen and Bob got away with their harassment for so long because no one had challenged them. The moment someone did, their entire illusion of power crumbled. And finally, this story highlights the importance of community unity. Corrupt HOAs, abusive leaders, and unethical organizations only survive when people are afraid to stand together. But when a community pushes back, exposes the truth, and demands accountability, the bullies always fall. At the end of the day, the lesson is simple. Know your rights, stand your ground, and never let anyone convince you that you have less power than you actually do.